The exact same organizational frameworks used in these super sterile corporate boardrooms today to hit like quarterly KPIs, well, they are the very same fundamental principles that built the Egyptian pyramids centuries ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they're what made the ancient Indus Valley civilization function so beautifully, too.
Right, because whenever human beings have realized that they just cannot achieve a massive goal individually, they've had to figure out how to coordinate. Management is essentially the invisible scaffolding behind, every major human achievement.
We really tend to think of management as this very modern jargon, like synergy or bandwidth or leveraging
All the
assets.
classic corporate buzzwords.
Exactly, the buzzwords. But stripped of all that, we are looking at a deeply historical survival tool. Today, we are pulling from a massive academic text from the Indira Gandhi National Open University, or IGNOU.
Right, highly respected material.
It is. The text covers management functions and organizational processes. And our mission for this deep dive is to demystify the art and science of how humans organize to get things done.
Which is so crucial.
Oh, for sure. Because whether you are managing a massive corporate team or just trying to keep your own chaotic household schedule from falling apart, there are foundational mechanics at play here.
Definitely. And to get to those mechanics, we have to start by defining what management actually is,
Right.
which historically has been surprisingly difficult.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, the experts spent decades trapped in this massive identity crisis, just arguing over its fundamental nature.
Okay, let's unpack this. What were they actually debating? Because to me, it seems pretty straightforward. You tell people what to do, and they do it.
If only it were that simple. For a long time, there was this fierce debate over whether management is a strict mathematical science or like a fluid, intuitive art.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so you had thinkers like Mary Parker Follett offering a very human-centric, almost poetic perspective. She defined management as the art of getting things done through the efforts of others.
That sounds incredibly collaborative.
It was. But then, on the exact opposite end of the spectrum, you had F.W. Taylor. He viewed the entire process through a completely mechanical lens.
Mechanical how?
To him, management was simply the art of knowing exactly what you want to do in the best and cheapest way.
Wow. Okay. So measuring human output, almost like you would measure the fuel efficiency of a car.
Precisely. And that tension really defined the era. A scholar named Luther Gulick argued strongly that management was becoming a true science.
Because of all the measuring.
Yeah, because science relies on cause and effect, disciplined imagination, and universal principles that can be tested. Gulick pointed out that management had absolutely developed theories and laws that apply universally across different organizations.
I mean, I can see the scientific side when it comes to things like supply chains or budget forecasting.
Sure.
But George Terry pushed back on that, didn't he?
He did, heavily. Terry argued that management is inherently an art because it's ultimately about bringing about desired results through the application of skills.
Right.
You're dealing with human beings, and that requires intuition, it requires judgment, and you only get good at it through deliberate, continuous practice. You can't just memorize a formula and instantly become a great leader.
Yeah, you can't put a human in a beaker and expect the exact same chemical reaction every single time.
Exactly.
It reminds me of cooking. Management is like being a head chef. On one hand, you desperately need the precise, exacting science of baking. Because if your measurements for budgets, schedules, or resource allocation are off by even a little bit, the whole cake falls flat.
That is a great way to look at it. But you also need the artistic intuition of seasoning.
Yes. You have a diverse team of individuals, and you have to know exactly how much motivation or empathy or pressure to apply to bring out the best flavor in that specific group.
What's fascinating here is how modern thinkers eventually reconciled this. They started viewing management as an inexact science.
An inexact science.
Right. It borrows heavily from the scientific method, but because it deals with complex, dynamic human behavior, it could just never be entirely predictable.
That makes a lot of sense.
And that inexact nature is also what fueled a third angle to this whole identity crisis, the question of whether management is a distinct profession.
Oh, like being a doctor or a lawyer.
Exactly. Edgar Schein, who was an organizational psychologist, laid out specific criteria for what constitutes a profession. He said it requires a codified body of knowledge, a long period of formal education, a strict code of conduct, and a professional association.
Which are definitely hurdles you have to jump through for medicine or law.
Right. And today, management fits that bill perfectly. We have business schools globally, specialized degrees, accreditation agencies, and strict corporate codes of ethics.
So the field has completely professionalized.
It really has.
Now, the text also outlines a fascinating historical turf war over vocabulary, specifically the difference between the words administration and management.
Oh, yes. The British and American schools of thought had completely different interpretations of those two words.
How so?
Well, the American school, supported by scholars like Ordway Ted, argued that administration is the thinking function. It's the board of directors setting the policy and the long-term vision.
Okay, so high level.
Right. And management, in their view, is simply the doing function. The managers on the floor implementing those policies day to day.
But the British school completely flipped that hierarchy upside down, didn't they?
They did. The British argued that management is the superior, wider, top-level function. And administration is just the lower-level execution of immediate clerical problems.
That seems like a recipe for constant miscommunication. Like, imagine an American and a British executive trying to collaborate in the mid-20th century.
It's definitely confusing.
How did we eventually resolve that terminology?
Modern scholars like Keith Davis stepped in and pointed out that making a rigid distinction is actually misleading.
Why is it misleading?
Because the cognitive process of planning, organizing, and executing is essentially the same at all levels of an organization. So today, we generally treat administration and management as interchangeable terms for the exact same process.
Okay, so if the underlying process has these deeply scientific elements we talked about, somebody had to be the first to try and measure it.
Oh, absolutely.
Which naturally leads us to the early 20th century, the Industrial Revolution, and an absolute obsession with workplace efficiency.
Welcome to the classical era of management.
Right.
F.W. Taylor, who we mentioned earlier, completely dominates this period with what he explicitly called scientific management.
And his big thing was efficiency, right?
Yes. His foundational belief was that there is always one best way to do any given task, and management's job is to discover it.
But how do you discover the absolute best way to do something subjective?
Well, you remove the subjectivity using a stopwatch.
Literally a stopwatch.
Literally. Taylor stood on factory floors timing workers. He had noticed this widespread practice among laborers called soldiering, where workers deliberately operated well below their actual physical capacity.
Wait, why would they intentionally slow down? Was it just a lack of motivation?
It was a survival tactic.
Yeah.
There was a universally held belief among industrial workers that if they became more productive, the factory would simply need fewer of them, leading to mass layoffs.
Oh, wow. So it's self-preservation.
Exactly. Plus, under the systems of the time, everyone got paid the same flat rate regardless of their output. So working faster didn't earn you more money, it just exhausted you and potentially cost your friend their job.
So the mechanics of the compensation system actually incentivized the workers to do the bare minimum.
Right. And Taylor wanted to prove that if you systematically analyzed the work, you could optimize it so drastically that the company would make a massive surplus.
And then use that surplus to pay people more.
Yes. With that surplus, you could actually afford to pay the fastest workers significantly more. So he set out to prove this with a series of famous experiments at the Bethlehem Steel Company.
The text details the pig iron experiment, which sounds totally grueling. How do you scientifically optimize someone carrying heavy metal all day?
So Taylor observed workers manually loading about 12.5 tons of pig iron onto rail cars per day. He theorized the human muscles basically operate like machines. They need specific cool-down periods.
Okay.
He calculated the exact standard time a worker needed to rest versus work. By forcing the workers to rest at specific, scientifically timed intervals, their physical abilities were maximized without hitting the point of exhaustion.
Wait, really? So by forcing them to stop working and rest, they moved more iron?
A lot more. They actually went from moving 12.5 tons a day to moving nearly 50 tons.
That is insane. 50 tons.
I know. And he took this methodology even further with the science of shoveling.
The science of shoveling.
Yeah. Before Taylor, a worker would just bring their own personal shovel from home and scoop up whatever material needed moving.
But the underlying mechanism there is flawed, right? Because scooping up heavy iron ore puts a completely different weight on the shovel than scooping up, like, light ashes.
Exactly. A scoop of iron ore might weigh 30 pounds, while a scoop of ashes might weigh 4 pounds.
Right.
Taylor ran exhaustive time studies and discovered that the scientifically optimal weight a worker should lift on a shovel to maximize daily output without burning out the muscles is exactly 21 pounds.
21 pounds. So what did he do?
He banned personal shovels.
Of course he did.
Yeah, and he mandated different-sized company shovels for different materials. a tiny shovel for iron ore and a massive scoop for ashes, ensuring every single lift was exactly 21 pounds.
That is wild.
The Gilbreths took a similar approach around the same time. They used early motion picture technology to film bricklayers at work.
Oh, like analyzing film reels.
Yeah, frame by frame. They analyzed every single micro movement a worker made just to eliminate unnecessary hand motions and speed up the process. This whole era was defined by a ruthless pursuit of structure. It's also when Max Weber introduced his theory of bureaucracy.
Now, bureaucracy usually has a negative connotation today. What did Weber intend it to be?
Weber envisioned bureaucracy as an ideal, perfectly rational organization. It required absolute division of labor, a strict top-down hierarchy, rigid formal rules, and crucially, impersonality.
Impersonality.
Yeah, every decision, promotion, and process was to be based entirely on merit and technical qualification, completely devoid of personal preference or emotion.
Okay, I have to push back on this entire era.
Go for it.
Timing a worker's every micro movement, stripping away all their autonomy, forcing them to use a specific shovel, and demanding impersonality. That sounds incredibly dehumanizing. You're treating a living person like a literal cog in a machine. Did these theorists completely ignore the psychological toll this took on the workforce?
You hit the nail on the head. That mechanical view of human labor created massive friction. The work became highly fragmented, deeply repetitive, and profoundly boring.
I bet.
It ignored human creativity entirely. Workers were exhausted and resentful, feeling reduced to just another factory tool. And it was that specific growing resentment that forced researchers to finally look beyond the stopwatch.
Which brings us to the behavioral approach, and perhaps the most famous psychological study in business history, the Hawthorne studies.
Yes. Running from 1924 to 1932 at the Western Electric Company in Cicero, Illinois. These studies were led by George Elton Mayo and a team from Harvard.
Okay.
They initially set out to do a classic Taylor-style scientific experiment called the illumination experiments.
They wanted to measure how the physical lighting in the factory affected worker productivity, right?
Exactly. They set up a control group and an experimental group. They turned the lights up in the experimental room, fully expecting the better visibility to increase productivity.
And it did.
It did. But then, to test the variable, they turned the lights down.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because productivity kept going up.
It kept rising regardless of what they did with the lighting, even when it was almost too dark to see the work. The engineers were completely baffled. The physical environment was somehow completely disconnected from the output.
So what was the underlying mechanism? If it wasn't the light, why were they working harder in the dark?
Because of what we now call the Hawthorne effect. The employees weren't responding to the physical illumination. They were responding to the psychological attention.
Oh, wow.
The simple fact that management and elite researchers were observing them, listening to their feedback, and seemingly caring about their welfare completely altered their mental state.
Just observing a team mechanically changes how that team performs. Does that still happen today? Like, is this like when you know your boss can see your active dot on Slack, so you make sure you are typing constantly?
It definitely includes that, but Mayo's findings were much deeper. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this shows the massive shift from managing tasks to managing psychology. He proved that a human being is not a rational economic man who only cares about money and piece rate efficiency. Humans are a social man.
A social man.
Yeah. The studies concluded that social norms, group pressure, and the desire for belonging define production levels far more than physical ability. Esteem and recognition are vastly more powerful motivators than a slight bump in pay.
This completely breaks the old definition of a manager. I mean, if productivity is driven by psychology rather than just stopwatches, you can't just be a timekeeper anymore.
No, you can't.
You have to figure out how to structure an organization around human behavior.
Exactly. And this realization paved the way for thinkers like Douglas McGregor, who developed Theory X and Theory Y. McGregor argued that how you manage a team depends entirely on your own internal assumptions about human nature.
Theory X is the old school, deeply pessimistic view, right? A Theory X manager assumes that the average person inherently hates work, wants to avoid it at all costs, lacks ambition, and basically must be coerced with the carrot and the stick.
Yeah, and the real danger of Theory X isn't just that it's pessimistic. It actually creates a self-fulfilling doom loop.
A doom loop.
Yes. If a manager assumes you are inherently lazy, they will micromanage your every move. That micromanagement strips away your autonomy, which makes you feel disengaged and apathetic.
Right, because you have no control.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then the manager sees your apathy, says, aha, I knew you were lazy, and micromanages you even harder.
Wow, it's a completely vicious cycle. So theory Y breaks that loop by assuming the exact opposite.
Exactly.
A theory Y manager assumes that people actually love work, that expending effort is as natural as play or rest. They believe people naturally seek out responsibility and will exercise self-direction if they are committed to a goal.
Spot on. If you treat your team as motivated contributors, you give them autonomy. They rise to the occasion, proving your trust was warranted.
That's a much better loop.
For sure. The text also touches on William Achi's Theory Z, which emerged later as a hybrid of American and Japanese management styles.
What's the focus there?
It focuses heavily on participative management, collective decision-making, and deep mutual trust between the employer and the employee.
So we have F.W. Taylor showing us the vital importance of efficiency and structure on one side, and Elton Mayo showing us the undeniable power of human psychology on the other.
Right.
How does a manager actually blend those two extremes on, like, a random Tuesday? What are the actual mechanics of the job?
Well, early theorists tried to cram a manager's daily job into massive, unpronounceable acronyms, essentially treating management like a rigid checklist. Luther Gulick came up with POSDCOB.
POSDCOB. That is a mouthful. What does it stand for?
It stood for planning, organizing, staffing, directing, coordinating, reporting, and budgeting. And Henry Fayol had a similar framework called POCCC.
But treating human dynamics like a rigid checklist doesn't really work in practice. The modern consensus realized this and distilled those massive acronyms down into 5 fluid, continuous actions, didn't they?
They did. Planning, organizing, staffing, directing, and controlling. Those 5 core functions are the engine of management.
Okay, let's break those down really quickly.
Sure. Planning is bridging the gap between where the organization is and where it wants to be. Organizing is creating the physical and structural framework to get there.
And staffing is putting the right human talent into that structure.
Exactly. Directing is the leadership aspect, motivating and communicating with that talent. And controlling is monitoring the progress to ensure the reality isn't deviating from the initial plan.
And Henry Fayol didn't just give us acronyms. He outlined 14 specific principles of administration to guide those 5 functions.
Right. He was very thorough.
Some of these are absolute game changers for anyone trying to lead a group today. Take unity of command, for example. Fayol stated that an employee should receive orders from one and only one superior.
Which is so important. Because if 2 managers are telling one employee to do 2 conflicting things, it creates instant paralysis. Discipline breaks down, authority is completely undermined, and the work just halts.
Fayol also recognized the physical bottlenecks of a traditional hierarchy. He established the scalar chain, which is the clear, unbroken line of authority from the CEO down to the floor worker. All communication is technically supposed to flow up and down this chain.
But sending a message up 5 levels of management just to have it come down 5 levels in another department is agonizingly slow.
Yeah, that sounds like a nightmare.
Fayol knew that strict adherence to the chain could literally kill a company in an emergency. So he created a mechanical workaround called the gangplank.
The gangplank.
Yeah, it officially allows people at the same level in different departments to cross-communicate directly, preventing bureaucratic gridlock.
Oh, that's smart. Fayol also championed esprit de corps, which translates to union is strength. He recognized long before modern team-building retreats that team spirit and harmonious relations are the greatest source of an organization's resilience.
Very true. But while Fayol gave us the principles, Henry Mintzberg gave us the reality.
What do you mean?
Well, in 1973, Mintzberg published a study that categorized what managers actually do all day into 10 distinct roles, divided into 3 broad categories: interpersonal, informational, and decisional.
Interpersonal roles are about managing relationships, right? Acting as a figurehead for the company, a leader motivating the staff, and a liaison building networks outside the organization.
Exactly. And informational roles are about processing data, acting as a monitor who gathers intel, a disseminator who shares it internally, and a spokesperson who communicates it externally.
And the decisional roles are where the strategic action happens. The manager must be an entrepreneur finding new opportunities, a resource allocator deciding who gets the budget, a negotiator striking deals, and importantly, a disturbance handler.
I love that one, disturbance
Well,
handling.
I visualize Mintzberg's framework like an orchestra conductor.
Okay, tell me more.
You are leaning into your interpersonal and informational roles, waving the baton, keeping everyone in harmony, interpreting the sheet music for the team.
Right.
But then suddenly someone's instrument catches on fire. You have to immediately drop the baton, grab a fire extinguisher, and become a decisional disturbance handler. A manager is constantly forced to switch between these 10 hats, sometimes minute to minute.
It requires intense cognitive flexibility. And doing so is harder today than it has ever been in human history
Why is it harder today?
because of the massive modern challenges outlined in the text.
Yeah.
We have to adapt these historical theories to current realities. We are talking about globalization, the explosion of information and communication technology, workforce diversity, and the relentless demand for innovation.
The landscape has fundamentally altered. The text points out Tata Motors having to adapt their management structures to compete on a global scale against entrenched international auto giants.
Right.
Or Reliance Jio entering the Indian telecommunications market and completely disrupting the cost of internet, forcing every other company to radically change their cost management strategies.
Huge disruption.
Or TCS, Tata Consultancy Services, using advanced ICT to manage complex operations and back-end support across multiple remote locations globally.
The sheer interconnectedness of the modern world means a manager isn't just dealing with the people on their factory floor anymore.
Right, they're everywhere.
They are managing diverse teams across different time zones, cultures, and technological platforms. This hypercomplexity has popularized what we call the contingency approach.
Meaning, the one best way that Taylor was looking for with his stopwatch doesn't actually exist.
Exactly. The contingency approach is the realization that management practices must adapt to the specific situation. What works for a massive distributed tech firm like TCS will fail miserably if applied to a local bakery.
So effectiveness depends entirely on the size, scale, and specific context of the organization.
Exactly. The text also touches on the systems approach. This argues that you have to view an organization mechanically like a computer system. You have a monitor, a keyboard, a processor. If the keyboard breaks, the entire system is rendered useless. Every department, from HR to marketing to engineering, is an interdependent part of the whole. You can't change one without affecting the others.
And to manage that interconnected system, modern leaders use the decision theory approach, which leans heavily into using big data, algorithms, and mathematical models to make complex choices that human intuition alone just can't process.
Exactly.
So, does modern technology make Fayol's 100-year-old rules obsolete, or does it just mean that we have to execute his principles at absolute warp speed?
This raises an important question. The core mechanics of human behavior and organizational structure haven't actually changed. A team still needs unity of command, whether they are communicating in a physical boardroom or via Slack.
That's very true.
What has changed is the pace. Modern managers can no longer afford to just be rigid rule enforcers like in Weber's bureaucracy. They have to act as change agents.
Change agents.
Yes. In a landscape defined by rapid technological shifts, a manager must actively manage their team's resistance to change and foster an environment of continuous adaptation.
Wow, we have covered incredible ground today. We started at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, literally measuring the weight of a shovel to maximize physical output.
We saw the inevitable backlash to that mechanical view, which forced a pivot toward human psychology, proving the profound impact of paying attention to people and treating them as social beings rather than economic machines.
And we explored how those two historical extremes merge into the 5 core functions and the 10 daily roles of a modern leader, all while navigating the warp speed challenges of a globalized, hyper-connected world.
Great management ultimately requires a delicate, constant balancing act between the strict science of resource allocation and the highly empathetic art of human relations.
So what does this all mean for you? It means that whether you are organizing a multinational corporate merger or just trying to get your family out the door on time for school, great management is about adaptability. It is understanding the mechanics of the task, but more importantly, understanding the psychology of the people performing the task.
Before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought drawn directly from Henry Fayol's 14 Principles.
Ooh, okay.
We discussed unity of command and the scalar chain, but Fayol also had a principle regarding the stability of tenure. He argued that high employee turnover is both a cause and an effect of bad management.
Makes sense.
But he took it a step further. He stated that mechanically speaking, it is actually better to have a mediocre manager who stays long-term than an extraordinary genius manager who leaves rapidly.
Wow. That flies in the face of everything we hear today. I mean, in our modern gig economy, in a corporate culture that practically encourages constant job hopping to climb the ladder and chase top talent, that is a wild concept.
It forces us to reevaluate our priorities. Is deeply rooted loyalty and long-term stability actually more valuable to the ultimate mechanical success of an organization than raw but fleeting genius?
That is a massive question.
It is a friction point every modern leader has to ponder.
That is a brilliant question to chew on. The next time you find yourself trying to organize people or resources, remember you are tapping into the exact same foundational skills that built the pyramids. Apply these frameworks, watch out for the Hawthorne effect, and don't be afraid to put on that disturbance handler hat when the orchestra catches fire. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.